Welcome to APCUG's Saturday Safari, where we're going to do an in-depth exploration of different topics. Today, we're really working today on video and editing and taking videos. John Krout's here from the Potomac area computer or area technology and computer society, PADX as they call it for short. And he's going to be back with us. He's been with us a number of times, and he's going to be talking about digital video editing and, surprising enough, how good of a video you can take with your smartphone or your tablet. So I'm going to turn things over to John, and we're going to learn all about that.
Well, thank you for that introduction, John. We are both JK. You may have noticed that, and we kind of kid each other about that when we get prepared for a meeting like this. I'm going to do two presentations. The first one is on digital video editing. I call it Introduction to Digital Video Editing Plus because it covers a couple of advanced techniques, one of which involves making live videos into Zoom backgrounds, and I will explain that in detail. The second presentation is something new that I've only explored in the last 6 months. And it discusses how to shoot 4K resolution video with your smartphone or tablet. And in between that, we're going to take a break, and that I'll handle the questions for the digital video editing during that time frame, that Q&A. And then after that, we'll go into the second presentation, and we'll handle the questions for that at the end of the second presentation. Now, in order to introduce some of the techniques that we're going to be talking about today for digital video editing, I would like to start off showing you a couple of short videos that I have made. And these will introduce some of the techniques that we can use to make our edited videos a little bit more interesting to people. So the first one I'm going to show you is a very simple thing that I produce every month for my computer club, the Potomac Area Technology and Computer Society, to introduce their meeting. It's what we call a pre-meeting announcements video. And I'm going to share that with you. So let me get that going. Okay, I'm on the basic tab. That's good news. And it's not showing me what I want to share. So let's see here.
Have you clicked on share screen?
I can do the screen. In fact, I think that's probably the easiest way to do it at this point. So I'll go ahead and do a share full screen. The videos are silent. I do not include an audio soundtrack for various reasons for today's purposes. All right, so here's the first one. This is a video that we show at the beginning of each PADACES meeting. I'm going to close off my video panel, and I'm going to close off my floating meeting controls as well. Let's see here. Just get those out of the way. There we go. Okay. I'm not going to show this full screen, but you're going to see that these are not just static slides. They introduce a sense of motion through magnification. Now there is music running with this, but for various reasons, I'm not showing that music. And you can see two things. One is when the slide is being shown, it slowly magnifies. And that gives a sense of motion that keeps the audience's attention. And the second thing you just saw is what's called a transition, a way of moving from one to another and telling the audience that, yes, the slide has changed, you should pay attention again in case your attention wandered. This is a collection of 15 slides, and we run it 4 times over a period of 14 minutes and 31 seconds. So I think we've pretty much seen all of that. Okay, I'm going to stop this one and go on to the next one. The next one's a little more interesting. I developed this next video as part of a presentation originally on photography, and in particular on a type of photography which captures very, very large scenes through a technique called composite panoramas. The point I was really trying to make here when I created this video is that photos rarely fit a standard high definition television precisely. In other words, that 16:9 aspect ratio is not necessarily what our photos are edited to fit. And so one of the things that happens, as you're about to see with a very wide photo, is a lot of unused screen at the top and the bottom. Let's take a look. So normally if we put a photo into a video, and here's an example of a panorama, it's in the San Luis Valley in Colorado. We have black bands at the top and the bottom because the photo is basically too wide. But with the techniques you're going to learn today, you can do a zoom in and you can do what's called a pan. And this adds a sense of motion, but also does a better job of revealing all the detail. And detail is what people really enjoy in photographs. I drove through there one day in, let's see here, that was July in 2000, I'm trying to remember. Well, anyway, several years ago. Here's a photo from Washington, D.C. On the Virginia side of the Potomac River. This is basically a square photograph of 4th of July fireworks. And I thought it looked a lot more dramatic if I filled the screen and then shifted the view upwards. And I did all of this with the Vegas movie studio film editor, which you're going to learn about here starting in a few minutes. Okay, now let's go to the slides. And we'll start on that one. Okay, let me mention before we actually get into the good stuff that I do include QR codes in both of today's presentations. Each QR code gives you a quick way to access a web page or a downloadable file without having to type the URL or whatever other information is required. And that means it's much faster and avoids typos. Very important, most recent smartphones have a QR code scanner built in. You may not be aware of it, but it's there if you have Android 11 or 12 or iOS 15. Recent can be as old as my Samsung Galaxy S10, which was designed 5 years ago, but in Android 11 and 12, it has a built-in QR code scanner. Recent iPhone also. Mine is not so recent. It's an iPhone 10. The camera app does act to scan QR codes. You don't even have to tap the shutter button. Just point it at the QR code and it recognizes it and gives you an option to open the URL if that's what the QR code contains or whatever else is in the QR code. If your iOS 15 phone does not scan the QR code, if the camera app doesn't do that, there is a setting you can adjust. You open the settings app, select camera, which is way down the list of apps. Turn on, when you do that, you're going to see on the very top, very close to the top of the page, maybe the second or third configuration item is a switch to turn QR code scanning on or off. So you just turn it on and then you can retry scanning the QR code with the camera app. For Android 11 and 12, in the pull down shade menu of the home screen, there is an icon when you pull it all the way down. You'll see an icon like this called Scan QR Code. You tap that and a Scan QR Code screen opens up. You point the camera at the QR code and the screen scans the QR code and again gives you an option to open the URL, store the the address information that might be in a QR code, or use the QR code to write an email. You're going to see that at the very end of my second presentation, that type of QR code. In the S10 phone, the camera app itself also acts as a QR code scanner. And if your Android camera app does not scan a QR code, then in the camera app settings, you go to, there's a switch also to turn on the scan QR code capability. Now, having said that, this applies to Android 11 and 12. Further back, you probably don't have that capability. So older devices can obtain a free QR code scanning app on the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store. All right, now let's get down to it. This is Digital Video Editing Fundamentals Plus. And I am delighted to be able to offer this for the first Saturday Safari. Let's talk for a moment about why digital editing is useful to you. First of all, we know by now, video is everywhere. People expect to see it. Make a presentable video highlights collection of, say, your vacations, your children, your grandchildren, your pets. John Kennedy told us a hilarious thing about a couple of his grandchildren today, and oh, how I wish he'd videotaped that. Create a resume of your public speaking skills. Well, that's relevant for me and some of you. Create virtual backgrounds for Zoom meetings. And I've created a number of them, and I'll show you how to do that. You can also, when you edit a video and you have a nice collection, you can create a DVD or a Blu-ray disc. Or the big thing today is to post videos to YouTube or other social media. And also today, you're going to learn some video vocabulary. If you don't want to create a video yourself, if you have somebody who will do it for you, it would be nice to communicate with them. And now you'll have some of the useful vocabulary. This is how I got started. I actually was in college in the early 70s, and I became an editor, a reporter, and a news anchor for a startup organization called MITV. And at the time, we were editing using open reel analog videotape, and boy, it was painful. More recently, in between 2004 and 2010, I produced more than 30 DVDs. These portrayed school concerts and plays in which my daughters performed. Here's a sampling of them. All right, now give you a brief agenda. We're going to take a look at video editing in terms of something we think all of you probably have some familiarity with, some experience: word processing. The idea of reorganizing paragraphs is very similar to the idea of reorganizing scenes in video. There's also, if you have any experience with an audio editor application such as Audacity, which is a free application, it's very similar to what we do in Audacity. There are fundamental tools involved. We're going to talk about media. We're going to talk about using the editor to preview media, seeing a small thumbnail view, and how the timeline is organized from left to right, from beginning to end. Transitions, there are transitions such as simple, what we call cuts, crossfades, fade in, fade out. I used a sort of page turn technique in that video called Which Photo Technique is More Dramatic? And there are motion types that we can introduce: pans left to right or right to left. Tilts, you saw examples of those in the sample video. Zooms, in that first samples video, we saw a slow zoom on each announcement slide. Rotations are possible too. Excuse me, I need some water. We're going to learn how to turn a slide deck into a video. The idea of a video project. how to save a video project means saving the sum total of the collected video samples, music, slides, narration, whatever else, titles, all of that you save in a video project. And a project is a simple file that points to each of the pieces that you have included. And because of that, we're going to talk about how to break a video project. You don't want to break a video project, but there is a rather easy way to accomplish that unfortunate result. And I want to show you how to avoid it. So first we're going to talk, that's why we're going to talk about how things get broken. A big part of this is adding motion to still images. This is one of the more advanced techniques. Making a zoom loop virtual background video, that's actually pretty easy. Rendering a finished product, which means after you've done all your edits, you create a final video that contains all the titles, all the music, all the scenes, all the transitions. That's called rendering. Okay, now the word processing analogy is actually not very difficult to understand. What we do in word processing is we create an initial sequence of words and paragraphs, and then we kind of shuffle things around sometimes, get pieces that are actually related to each other together. And that's why we call it controlling and altering the sequence of words. And in word processing, broadly speaking, the sequence flows from top to bottom on paper. The intro appears at the top and the conclusion at the bottom. And so you can think of finished video as a sequence of scenes. And in Audacity, an audio editor, we can actually sequence a group of sounds or songs. In this case, I've portrayed 3 different songs, each in its own set of stereo tracks. And you can see as time moves from left to right, and we can simply adjust each track by moving the song left or right to begin earlier or later. And there's the time arrow, so to speak. So the song on the left at the top would be the first one that the audience would hear, and then the one in the middle would start roughly when the first one ends, and the one on the bottom would start roughly when the middle one ends. All right. I sure hope your slides are not being blocked by this waiting room notice. Can anybody confirm?
No, it's just you that sees it.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure it didn't overwrite the title on the slide. I use an editor software package called Vegas Movie Studio 16 Platinum. I want to explain that. Originally, when I first bought the product, it was published by Sony. Sony sold it to a German firm called MAGIX. When was that? 5 years ago, something like that. And the word platinum simply means that it comes with all of the bells and whistles, add-on software packages. The one I really cared about is called DVD Architect, which allows you to make a Blu-ray disc or a DVD disc with menus. But mostly what I've been doing since I bought this version, is producing videos that are just used as videos on their own, either on YouTube or like the announcement video that I showed you for my computer user group, or for that matter, as a Zoom background. I've produced several of those. That's all possible with Vegas. Now, Vegas is now at version 19, and they claim the suggested retail price is $99. They have been sending me various offers at much lower prices because I'm a current customer. I'll probably upgrade on 19. There's a few little quirks in 16 that I think maybe they've worked out by now. And also I have a new computer, so I want to get the latest and put it on that. But if you really want to save some money and you don't care about making DVDs or Blu-ray discs, then the thing to do is to just buy the basic software, and you can save some money that way. Vegas Movie Studio 19 is also marketed as Vegas Movie Studio 2022. You see those terms, I believe that they are actually synonymous. Now, I have tried several other editing packages, including, well, now let me see, VideoPad, which is a free package you can download from NCH. And I've seen demonstrations of the Apple package, which is Final Cut Pro, and I've seen demonstrations of Adobe Premiere. They all work with what's called a horizontal timeline. So the sequence of scenes, titles, music, and so forth, it all begins at the left and ends on the right. You can organize and sequence media on the timeline via drag and drop, and that includes video, audio, still images, superimposed titles, lots of different things. And on the timeline, you can tailor a single video, for instance, dividing it into multiple pieces, cutting out the stuff that really isn't going to be interesting, maybe camera screw ups and so forth, and resequence, move the sequence, reorganize the sequence and try different ideas. You can do all of that. And I might add, what I've described so far about editing is also available in VideoPad. And you can preview the results because the editor includes a small television-like preview pane. Now let's look at a few more terms. Media. Media is a generic catch-all term for videos, still images, music, titles, and so forth. Tracks. Well, that's where media are sequenced for inclusion in a finished video file. So each track is itself sort of a time sequence running from left to right. A project, I mentioned that earlier, is a file containing pointers to all media files and the current state of all tracks. Now, having said that, here is a screen from Vegas Movie Studio 16. And in this screen, I want to point out several things. First of all, the media area has thumbnails of various slides and audio that I want to include in the monthly pre-meeting video for my user group. To the right of media is the preview pane, and it has controls very much like a DVD player, or for that matter, a VHS videotape player. Below that are tracks, and here you're going to see on the left, far left, to the left of what I call the timeline cursor, there is tracks named text, picture-in-picture, video, and audio. And in fact, there can be many more tracks. On the far right, you see a track scroll bar that lets you move the track display up and down, so you can get to whatever tracks you need to get to. The timeline cursor itself is a vertical line, and when you play in the preview, that vertical line will move along to show you exactly where in the sequence of scenes you are at any moment in time. And you can also move it back and forth by dragging it with your mouse pointer. All right, did I skip anything? Well, no. Just like in the screen I showed you of Audacity, time moves from left to right, and you can actually see a time scale up above the text track. At the moment, the timeline cursor is at time 0. And how do I know that? Well, just above the track names, there is a master clock, and you can see it set to all 0. That semicolon indicates that the final 2 zeros are frame numbers within each second, and the normal number of frames per second is 30. And this one is set up, this particular video is set up that way. It happens that Zoom itself transmits at 25 frames per second. And so it is possible also to produce a video that is precisely tailored to the Zoom frame rate. You can actually produce a video that runs at 25 frames per second, which is precisely what Zoom uses. So if you're interested in producing something like a virtual background for Zoom, doing it at 25 frames per second is a pretty good idea. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. The first thing you need to do when you open up your video editor is add media. You're usually starting out with some sort, at least one video recording or set of slides or something that you want to include. So Movie Studio provides an Explorer-like window to let you browse through your drives and your folders. And you can find video files, sound files, still image files. You can select each desired file, right-click it, and a menu appears. And when that menu appears, you can choose Add to the Project Media List. And the nice thing about that is that when you have all your media in that project media list, you don't have to kind of sort through it and ignore the stuff that's not relevant. It's all relevant because you chose to put it in the project media list. And there's a project media window that allows you to see it. And the fact that the files are in the project media window means when you choose Save Project, those files in the project media window will be part of the project file and therefore appear if you stop that working on that project, shut down the editor, and days later come back and start it up again. By reopening the project, you will see all the project media in the project media window again. It's very convenient. But that means save your project frequently is a very, very life-saving habit. So in the file menu in Vegas Movie Studio, simply choose the word save, and that will save your project. It will ask you initially to give it a name. After that, when you do file menu save, it just saves the project. So here's an example. I have clicked on a particular piece of media, and here's the right-click menu. The window for browsing your drives is called Explorer. I circled that on the lower left. And then the menu that pops up when you right-click on an individual piece of media has that choice in it, which I circled in the menu, called Add to Project Media List. And here's an example of the Project Media window, which is in a tab immediately to the left of the Explorer window tab. And here you see the slides I added. This was for, I think, well, I can't read those things very well, but I think it was either November or December of last year. And now let's talk about how to break that project file, because it really is a wonderful concept. But your project file, as I mentioned before, contains the locations of each one of the media files that you have added to your project media window. Now, this is how you can break it. If you delete or move any of those files after you save the project, you can easily do that, for instance, with Windows File Explorer. And then later you resume work on the project, Movie Studio will not be able to find the deleted or moved files. So this is critical. You have to remember yourself when you have added a file to your project and saved your project. Don't move that file. Don't delete that file unless you first tell use Vegas to remove that file from the project media list. All right, now let's talk about timeline tracks. Timeline tracks have a very fundamental role in video editing. It just helps organize the media that happen simultaneously. So if you have video in one track and you want to add an overlaid title, then that would be in another track and it would occur at the same point where that part of the video appears. And of course, audio as well. The nice thing about a track, if you need to adjust something in one track, it won't affect any other. You can adjust audio level, you can adjust video brightness, you can adjust the content of your title text. Now here's an example. I've blown up the names of the various tracks that we saw in that previous full screen image of Vegas movie studio. The topmost track is called text. You can see its name clearly. Second one is a type called picture in picture, which allows you to superimpose a smaller image on a larger one. Video track for full-size video. Audio track. Incidentally, in the video track, I drop in the still images, and the video editor automatically gives them a default length. You can vary the length simply by dragging the left or right edge of the particular still image left or right. You can also control what the default length is. Okay, there's an audio track. In the audio track, you can apply individual controls to individual sections of the audio. Individual volume controls. You can make it louder. You can make it softer. There's a music track below audio. I rarely use it because I put my music in the audio track simply to put it closer to the video track so I can see it more easily. You can add more tracks of each type. You're not limited to one video track, not limited to one text track or picture-in-picture track. Now let's talk about transitions. A transition refers to some sort of visual change from one video scene to another. That can be from one still image to another, for instance. And you saw I was using a very obvious transition in that sample video I showed you from my user group. The simplest transition is called a hard cut. And that means at the end of one scene, you start the beginning of the next. They don't overlap. They don't fade from one to the other. You just hard cut. The image changes instantly, and some people sometimes consider it to be abrupt. Now, George Lucas did a marvelous thing in Episode 4, which was the first Star Wars movie, the one he personally directed. He had some scenes fade out, followed by an abrupt cut into action. And he really used that to heighten audience tension. And I thought it was very effective. And I'm not sure there was ever a prior example of anybody doing something like that. So how do we do any of this? Well, I'm going to show you. There's a gadget on the left and right end of every video or still image in a video track. And that gadget is called the fade gadget. The blue arrow points to, in the upper right, to a blow up, an enlargement, so you can see exactly how the fade out gadget looks. And the idea is to apply a fade out or fade in at the beginning of the scene, or fade out at the end of a scene. You use this gadget, which will appear when you move your mouse to roughly the middle of the left or right edge of the scene. And a box pops up. It reads fade out offset all zeros. And what that means is if you're applying a fade out, you drag the box to the left and you can establish a 1 second fade out. You can establish a ½ second fade out. You can establish whatever length you want. So it's really a matter of once your mouse makes the gadget visible, it's really a matter of drag and drop. So here's an example where I have created a 1 second fade out. And you can see as I dragged it to the left, the gadget fade out box stayed visible and told me what the current duration or offset, as they say, of the fade out is. So if I wanted 2 seconds, I would drag it another 1 second further to the left. Audio has a very similar arrangement. You can also do abrupt cuts. You can do fade ins and fade outs. When you do an overlap of a fade in from one scene or audio to the, or from the end of one audio to the beginning of another, that's called a crossfade. And that is the default. When you overlap two scenes or two pieces of audio, it will the editor will automatically introduce a crossfade. Now, at the end of if you want to create an overlap transition, you have two pieces of two scenes in a video track. You drag the one on the right so it slightly overlaps the end of the one on the left, and the editor will also show you as you drag it how much of an overlap you've created. And it will do that in seconds and frames. The overlaps, when you do this, you're not dragging the left or right end of that second scene. You drag it from the middle, so the whole scene moves. For short videos, it's rare to see a overlap duration longer than 2 seconds. Or shorter than a half second, because the overlap is intended to give the audience a visual signal that the scene is changing. You have to make it long enough for the audience to realize that. If you're really lucky, they're paying close attention, and a half second is enough. But I rarely do less than 1 second because I don't count on being that lucky. And as I mentioned before, when you do overlap scenes or audio, the default transition type is called a crossfade. But there are many other types of overlaps made available by your video editor package. We're going to take a look at that. Video on the left is the first scene. The video on the right is the second scene. What I circled in this part of the Vegas video editor application is a video track which has an overlap in it, where we see the duration is 1/2 second, 15 frames out of 30. So to create that, I click and hold on the middle of the second scene, and I drag it to the left so that it overlaps the end of the first scene. The editor applies the default crossfade transition. And once again, as you can see, it displays that I've done 1/2 second of overlap in this case, 15 frames. Now, here's a little tip. Sometimes this can get to be, well, let me put it this way. I just turned 69 years old. I'm a senior citizen. My hands are not quite as steady as they once were. So one of the things that makes life easier is to change literally the scale of the timeline bar, which is circled in this display. Now that timeline bar, you can make it as long as the entire width of the window, and that gives you the big view of the entire project that you've been working on, everything you've put into tracks. Or you can drag the right or left end of that timeline bar to make it shorter. And the nice thing about making it shorter is then 1 second covers maybe half of the width of the screen. And when that happens, it's much easier to do a precise overlap. So that's a way to get things done precisely without suffering the pain of having to do it 20 times to get it right. Here's an example of what a crossfade looks like in the preview window of the video editor. So I happen to move the cursor, the vertical line you can see there, so that it's right in the middle of an overlap crossfade. And you can see that's the default transition type. The cursor, as I mentioned, you can see it, actually you can see it magnified on the right, so you can see just what I'm talking about in terms of its placement. Okay, now, in the tabs that include Explorer and Project Media, there's also a tab called Transitions. And this gives you access to a whole bunch of fairly creative transitions that you can apply in place of the default crossfade when two scenes overlap. So you click on that tab and you're going to see a depiction and a name for each of the available crossfade replacements, excuse me. The list is far longer than the window allows us to see. So there's a vertical scroll bar on the right. You can scroll up and down and look at all of them. When you click on one, the video editor will show you an animation of what it looks like. In this case, I clicked on 3D blinds. Once you have chosen one of these transitions, you simply click and drag it to an overlap in the video track. And that applies it. It looks different in the timeline when you apply it. You can see here, it doesn't just show the duration of the overlap. It also shows that you have applied a custom transition. The transitions can even be configured. So here I clicked on the transition icon in the overlap and this window appeared called Video Event FX. And what this does is allow me to control various aspects of the chosen transition. In this case, the word division means how many barn doors or blinds are we going to see? And I typically change that from 8 to 4. There are other choices also under 3D blinds, a number of extra spins. And I don't think that's a good idea to apply unless you're doing an overlap of 2 seconds or longer. I'm not even sure what stagger means, but you can also change the direction of the blinds. You can make them left to right, right to left, up to down, and down to up. And when you're done, you click the red X in the right. That does not cancel what you're working on. It simply applies whatever changes that you have chosen under 3D blinds to the particular transition that you are working on. And there's an example with 8 blinds. And this is right smack in the middle of a 15 frame overlap. And as I mentioned in the last slide, you can change the number of blinds and also the direction in which they move. So you can have these vertical blinds can be left to right or right to left. And then if you choose down to up or up to down, you get horizontal blinds. All right, now, still images. As I mentioned before, when you drag a still image to a video track, the editor software treats each image as a video scene. Since still images by definition have no duration, it applies a default duration. And that default, as delivered, Movie Studio 16 uses a default of 5 seconds. I changed that default to 15 seconds at the request of the president of our computer club. And it's possible to increase or decrease the duration of any individual image in the timeline, in the video track, simply by click and dragging on the right edge of the photo or the left edge for that matter. Now, adding motion to still images. This is something that I consider part of the plus in this presentation. There's various types of motion you can apply. In the world of shooting live video, a pan is created by moving the video camera either left to right or right to left. A tilt is created by, as you might expect, tilting the video camera up or down. A zoom means you move the video camera forward, closer to the subject, or backwards, away from the subject. So that's zoom in or zoom out. And you can do the same thing these days with zoom lenses. It's also possible to use Movie Studio to add these motions and rotation as well to still photos. The idea, the fundamental concept of this work in Vegas Movie Studio is called a keyframe. Now, a frame in video is simply a single still image. We all know from experience the typical frame rate in video is 30 frames per second. And that's actually an approximation. In reality, because of the way that the original analog video, analog transmission standard was created, it's 29.9 seconds, 29.97 seconds. Sorry, 29.97 frames per second. That's it. But for most intents and purposes, calling it 30 frames per second is entirely adequate. A keyframe is simply one individual still image in a video scene where you choose to begin or end a motion effect. And typically you're going to select two keyframes in a scene, one at the beginning and another one at the end of whatever effect you're applying. Whether it's a pan or a tilt or zoom in or zoom out. Now, at each keyframe, you set what you want the effect to be. And I'm going to show you how to do that. But the important point is this, that in between the start point and the end point, the editor software will modify every video frame between those 2 points to create smooth, continuous motion. And that's a technique called software interpolation. So you define what you want to start with in terms of the scene and what you want to end with, and the computer will figure out what to do on each still frame in between the start and end point. So, as an example, if the motion occurs across 500 video frames, which is a bit more than 16 seconds, then the software will modify each of those 500 frames so that 1/500th of the motion occurs in each frame. If you think back to that video I showed of the mountains and clouds in the San Luis Valley, that was done with keyframes, where I established one at the beginning of that wide panorama and one at the end. And I told it to apply the pan motion, and that's what it did. That's how I created that sense of motion across that wide panorama. Now, what we want to do is magnify the timeline because we're going to apply a magnification effect to a slide that is 15 seconds long. So we want to be able to see that individual slide very readily. And that's why I suggest you magnify the timeline. You find the still image that you want to work on. You click on that image's gadget called the Event Pan Crop button, which I have circled in the timeline, and I've given you an enlargement of it to make it easier to see down below. That Event Pan Crop button lets you introduce motion effects using keyframes. So here's the video of event FX for keyframe definition. And it has its own timeline cursor within the overall scene. And I pointed out that timeline cursor, also enlarged it at the bottom so you can see it. Right now it's set at the very beginning of the scene. I want you to notice one other thing. This scene at the moment encompasses the entire still image. And the important point to note about this is that you see a dotted rectangular box around the still image. Keep that in mind. That's going to help you a great deal in understanding how this stuff works. Now, there are some buttons just below the timeline, and I've assigned numbers to the buttons because I need to explain these to you. These allow you to apply new keyframe locations within the scene. The button number 1 says move to the first keyframe, and normally you will apply that first keyframe will be at the beginning of the scene. The second button moves you to the immediate prior keyframe. And yes, there are circumstances where you will want to apply more than 1 or more than 2 keyframes to a scene, particularly for what I did in that panorama video. Button 3 moves you to the next keyframe. Button 4 moves you to the final keyframe. And finally, the one that I think is potentially the most important, number 5, allows you to add a keyframe wherever the timeline cursor is located at the moment within the scene. And if you add one in a place where you don't really want it, button number 6 allows you to, once you've moved the cursor to a keyframe, allows you to delete the keyframe. Now, here's 2 preview screens, and one of them on the left shows you that you're at frame 30 of the video preview for a scene, and one of them on the right shows you that we are at frame 400 in the same scene. And you can see the one on the right is obviously zoomed in a bit compared to the one on the left. Now, how do we create that effect? We add a keyframe at the starting point, and we take the keyframe timeline cursor to the very end of the scene. We add a keyframe at the ending point. And what we're going to do is tell the editor that we want the image to be magnified at the end. And I'll show you how to do that. This, by the way, works best when media resolution is much higher than the video you want to publish. So if you're publishing something for Zoom, which is 1080p resolution, then you want to use something that has a much higher number of pixels vertically. And indeed, these slides have 2,880 pixels. Let's see. No, that's not it. I've forgotten the number, but it's huge. It's a lot bigger than 1,080. We may actually see it here in a moment. Okay, so we're going to let the first frame display the entire image. And what we're going to do is shrink the rectangle around the slide so it only displays the center of the image, a smaller area. This is a lot like using a zoom lens on a camera or camcorder to zoom in. So the final frame, as seen by the audience, will be magnified by the editor software and fill the full resolution of the video. So let's look at how we control the extent of that zoom in. Here, I've moved to the end keyframe in my scene, which is usually the end of the scene for, at least for this pre-meeting slideshow that I produce. You have some interesting information here under the word position. You have 4 numbers, a width, a height, and you can see the height is actually 1,620. That's greater than 1,080. You can see that they have something called X center and Y center, and I'm going to explain those two. That's the center of the rectangle. The width and the height defines the dimensions of the rectangle. So what we're going to do is lock the aspect ratio by clicking that button right there. And that means if I change the width, the height will automatically change so that it's still the standard 16:9 aspect ratio for modern video. Then I'm going to reduce the image width. And you can see I circled that width and I pointed to it here. You click on any one of those numbers, you'll find that it is a field that you can edit. So in this case, what I did was change that number from 2880 to 2300, and you can see that the rectangle is now much smaller. It's still centered where the original rectangle was centered, on the center of the slide, but it is much smaller, and it also changed the width correspondingly to maintain a 16:9 aspect ratio. And the superimposed dash line rectangle shows you the final magnification. Now, it just happens if you look at the bottom right corner of this screen capture, you can see the timeline cursor is sitting at the very end. And what we're seeing is the width 2300 and the corresponding height is much reduced compared to the numbers at the beginning of this scene. And remember what I said, when you set a beginning and an end, what the software does is software interpolation to figure out what happens in between on a smooth linear basis. So you can think of that rectangle as a camera looking within your scene. You can tell the video editor to move that rectangle left or right or up or down, which is what I did for those photos that I showed you in that sample video. The movement of the rectangle across the digital image gives the audience a sense of motion. You can enlarge or shrink the rectangle, the way I just demonstrated for the pre-meeting slideshow. And to the audience, that looks like zooming out, which means backing away, or in, magnifying the digital image. And we use a magnification effect on every one of the 15 slides just to keep the audience's attention, because motion is what our eyes are programmed to see. That's the sort of thing that we pay attention to automatically. Now, you can preview the motion effect. Once you've applied it, then you can just play that portion of the video, that one scene, and see what it looks like. As I mentioned before, the preview window has VCR-like buttons to start, pause, and stop preview. If you don't like your initial work on the scene, you can increase or decrease the width in the end keyframe, and make sure that you don't clip out by magnifying too much. You may have clipped out something that's important. So what you want to do is make sure that you right size the end magnification state, and that means changing the width in the end keyframe. Now, panning. What we do to pan is, first of all, we do a little bit of magnification, because we got to have room on the left and the right to move that rectangle. And then we set an X position that is at the far left of the scene for the first keyframe, and for the final keyframe at the far right. We don't have to change the Y position value, the up and down. To do that would introduce a tilt rather than a pan. But obviously that's what I did in that demonstration video. I did a pan across the San Luis Valley composite panorama, and I did a tilt up on the fireworks image from the Potomac River. There's also a little further down in the video event FX window for a scene, there is a thing called rotation angle, and you can actually cause still images to rotate if you want as well, by adjusting that rotation angle at the final keyframe. Okay, now I'm going to take a minute to examine how you can make zoom loops. And this is actually easier because it doesn't involve keyframes. What I'm going to show you is an example that is a live video. We know that Zoom displays a video virtual background as a continuous loop. In other words, it repeats. That's also true in the new feature for waiting rooms, where you can assign a waiting room video. And we tested it and found that Zoom also causes that video to repeat in a continuous loop. For Zoom virtual backgrounds, we don't want sound in the video because it's behind us. And if we're going to be talking, we don't want to have to fight over the normal sound in the virtual background. Now, as I mentioned, when the video virtual background ends, Zoom automatically restarts that video. The start of each repetition can be abrupt if the final scene in the video differs from the initial scene. Now, I look for a way to eliminate that abrupt transition back to the beginning, and I figured it out. Make the video end at the same frame on which it starts, and we're going to learn how to do that. It's a very easy technique in the editor. Think of each video as a sequence of frames. So for instance, the first frame is A, the middle is B, the end is C. The basic technique to eliminate the abrupt restart in a Zoom video background loop is to show the video forwards and then backwards. And that means it would become A, B, C, C, B, A. And when it ends on A, then when the Zoom background repeats, it begins on A again. And there's literally a very seamless experience on the part of the people watching it. They can't tell where it begins and ends. And here's how we do it. I shot a video the very first time I tried this. I shot a video in the front of my yard in the springtime of some daffodils. It was a windy day, so they were blowing back and forth. What I did in the video track in Vegas movie studio, I inserted that video twice. And then it turns out there's a very convenient mechanism in Vegas movie studio to reverse that second instance of the video. So I right-clicked on the second instance of the video, and this menu pops up here. And in that menu, there's a choice called reverse that tells Vegas to run the selected scene, which is the same as the initial scene, run it in reverse. And so what does that do? That creates the video that goes A, B, C, C, B, A, where the CBA is in the reversed video. So when the initial scene ends at C, the reverse scene starts at C and works backwards to A. And there's some types of motion, notably flowers in the breeze, where you can't tell the difference between it's blowing forwards and it's blowing backwards. So it looks like it's just a continuous loop as a Zoom background. And here's what it looks like. This is actually a fire pit fire, and it ran 10 seconds. What I did was I added it twice into the video timeline, and then the second one, I reversed it. And once I did that, they actually, in the Vegas video editor, inserts the word reversed so you know exactly what you did. And so I ended up with a 20-second video that would run continuously. And I know that there's an old adage that fires don't burn backwards, but I got to tell you, I could not tell. I absolutely could not tell that the second part of this Zoom loop was actually running backwards. And I thought that was extremely effective as a Zoom virtual background. Okay, now Once you've done your creative work inside the editor, the next thing you need to do is create a video file containing all of it. And most of the time, we're either going to do that in the MP4 format, or sometimes for Apple, we work in the MOV format. And the word you need is render, and that's in the file menu in Vegas Movie Studio. We pull down that file menu and we select render as. And this is the window that opens. You have various formats listed on the left. Most of the time, we're going to select MP4, but you can select various other types of movie file formats. The render as window opens also what's called a template, and over here on the right we see templates for various frame rates and various resolutions. So as it turns out, sometimes in order to save space, it's a good idea to save a video as a 720p resolution. We found the pre-meeting video actually still reads it's very readable at that 720p size, and it reduces the size of the video file quite a bit. You'll also notice just down 2 rows below the blue highlighted row, there's a row that reads Internet HD 1080p 25 frames per second. And that's the one you use if you're producing a video for Zoom, because Zoom operates at 25 frames per second. There's the default format. I circled it for you. There's the subtype, including the resolution and the frame rate. You select both of those. And then at the bottom, you're going to fill in you're going to choose a folder and choose a name for your video. There's the highlighted Internet HD 25 frames per second from that menu, just to make it crystal clear that it's there. Now, there's always trade-offs when you are rendering a finished video file. Rendering, regardless of the original media size or the frame size for still videos, rendering realizes or resizes each to a constant resolution. And we showed 1080p as one of the choices. I mentioned 720p is another choice. And as it turns out, 4K video is available, an available resolution. And that video I showed at the beginning about which photo approach is more dramatic, that was actually rendered at 4K resolution. It was only transmitted at 1080p because that's all that Zoom will support now. Maybe someday they'll support a higher resolution. I don't know. But I enjoyed working with it and showing that on my television set because it really produced a wonderfully detailed image. So those are the 3 choices. Lower resolution reduces the file size and reduces the image quality. Not such a big deal when you're working with text, but it like my pre-meeting slideshow, but it can have an effect when you're dealing with highly detailed photographic images or highly detailed video images. Higher resolution necessarily increases the file size and increases the quality. I mentioned earlier that the US standard is generally described to the public as 30 frames per second, but if you really want to impress somebody, you can tell them it's actually 29.97 frames per second. And that's about the only reason you need to know that. And I mentioned the 25 frames per second used by Zoom. That does reduce the file size slightly. If you are not particularly inclined to record video with the camera, but you want to try editing, there is this site, Pexels, PEXELS.com, which is loaded with short videos that are free to download and use. And I have converted some of them to Zoom backgrounds. There's a lot of creative work up there. I put up a QR code so you can, you don't have to type in the URL. You can scan the QR code and look at that website on your phone immediately if you want to. So we'll wait just a moment in case you want to do that. Okay. Now, I mentioned VideoPad. VideoPad is published by NCH Software. I've shown you the URL here. VideoPad does edit video files up to and including 4K resolution. It does not support keyframes. That's the only technique. I'm pretty sure it supports reverse video, but it does not support keyframes. So if you want to get your feet wet without spending a whole lot of money, this is available for Windows. It is not available for Mac, unfortunately. And that's the end of this presentation. I have a QR code here for the website for my group, the Potomac Area Technology and Computer Society. If you want to, you can request. I'll give you details later on after the second presentation on how to request the Zoom details for enjoying one of our meetings. If you log on at 12:45 Eastern time for our meetings, which are on Saturday afternoons, you'll get to see the pre-meeting video in its entirety. Okay, so at this point, I'm done with the first presentation, and I'm going to end this screen share, and we can deal with some questions.
I have a few questions here. Is there a way to scan a QR code on a PC? Otherwise, I have to use my phone to get a link and then get that link to my PC.
That's a good question. First of all, let me make it clear that these two presentations that I'm giving to you today, those URLs that I publish are live. When I create the PDF file and send it to Judy, she will send it to you. And so if you can wait a few days, then you'll be able to see it on your Mac or your Windows box. However, there is a way to directly scan. Now, unfortunately, it's not easy. I've written an article about this. I haven't published it yet, but there is a way to scan barcodes using a webcam and your Windows computer. I suspect there is one for Mac as well, but I don't have a Mac to test on. And what I do in order to accomplish that, I use my phone as a webcam, and then I can easily point the phone at the QR code, and the phone transmits that information to the barcode reader software that I've installed on my Windows box.
John,
so,
if you
yes.
send that article to me, even though it's not published, I'll be more than happy to get it to the person who asked the question.
It's a long one. It's
okay.
It's one of those things I wrote in two parts because it's pretty long.
That's
but
okay. He can just scan it.
I understand your point.
He's a fast reader.
Okay. Another question, please.
We have a gentleman who would like to purchase the software, and he asked if there's a 14-day trial, and I looked it up, and there's a 30-day trial. And if you will do another hands-on workshop where everybody works along with you as you take them through the program.
Ooh.
I actually said yes, because we've already been done that before. I knew that would be right up your alley. And
I think that'd be terrific.
We did it with Bitwarden. Everybody played along.
Yeah. There's a lot of merit to that, and I'd love to try it.
Okay. It works.
Yeah.
Another thing is there is a 20% discount off with apparently the code winter all caps 2022.
Not surprising. I think that showed up in an email I got this week.
I know, apparently it's open for the whole free world. And And as usual, for those who keep asking if, you know, you're going to get the information, my reply was, since we started Wednesday workshops and now Saturday safaris, since May 2022, everybody who attends gets the link to the YouTube video. You get all the handouts.
Right.
PDF of the presentation. Sometimes I get extra handouts, or I come up with some places where you can look things up. And that never deviates. That happens. And we've been doing VTC since 2012, and this is taking their place. And that same thing has been happening actually since 2012. And if we didn't do that, I'm sure somebody would come and hit us over the head with. And that's about it. So you're good to go for your, and we're going to open mic after both presentations. Kurt,
Yep. I see a couple of hands up. Have we addressed their question?
Okay, Kurt, go ahead. John's got to do some magic here. There you go.
Okay, there's another way to take and make a continuous loop without having to go backward and forward. Let me try to describe it for you. You've got a collection of scenes. Okay, someplace in your first scene, okay, you can take and cut that. Make a copy of the first half of the first scene. Okay, move that to the end of your presentation. And now do a crossfade from the last scene that you had now into the first part of the copied first scene. Okay, now you will run continually. You will start in the middle of a scene, but if this is a continuous loop, nobody's going to notice that. Okay, and when you go through at the end of what is now your last scene, you will have an image, a frame that exactly lines up with the first one when you come back around again.
That's a very good point. And in fact, I think that is what is done in the default video virtual background that's provided by Zoom, the one with the waves on the beach and the palm tree. I think that is precisely what they do.
Kurt, as usual, I will ask, would you write that up and send it to me so I can include it in the handouts? Thank you so much. Bob
I'm
G,
not the only one who gets on the hook.
no, that is true. Bob G, you're on. And I believe this is your favorite program, isn't it?
Not mine, no.
Oh, no, I thought this was the one you liked. Okay, go.
No, Screencast-O-Matic is my program.
Okay.
On the question about how do I get a QR code or the link from a QR code, when I do that, I select the option to send it to an email, my email address. I now have it in my email address. That's the quickest way I know of getting it directly to your computer.
Thank you so much. You want to send that to me too? Appreciate it.
Okay.
Short and sweet and to the point. Okay, I wasn't supposed to do open mic. John's going to get mad at me in a minute, but Steve, you're on, short and sweet and to the point. Go.
He is talking, but we're not hearing him.
Oh.
Turn your volume
see.
up.
Closed captioning is covering it up. Interesting. Can't hear you, Steve. Why don't you work on it? And when we open up the mic after the second presentation, you can ask your question, okay? Just nod.
I saw another question in the chat. I just looked at it from JJ Johnson, and I want to address that question. The question is, wouldn't creating a slideshow program for the intro be easier than video editing? I have also extensively explored how to create a long soundtrack for a slideshow in PowerPoint or LibreOffice Impress. And that is a workable approach with one qualification. You can't do magnification. Video allows you to do that, as I've demonstrated. But otherwise, I think it is very reasonable to use something that you're familiar with. If you don't want to, if you are fairly familiar with creating slideshows in Impress or PowerPoint, and you do not want to apply the magnification effects that I've demonstrated, you can certainly do it that way.
That's what the dummies of the world do. John, you're on to present. If I can do it, because I'm a dummy when it comes to this, okay? Back to you, John. You're on for presentation number 2. Steve, we'll get you during open mic after that. Share your screen, kiddo.
I didn't know which John you were talking about.
Oh,
I thought
sorry.
you were talking about John Kennedy. Okay, so we'll get, let me get that second one loaded. Let's see here. All right. Here it is. Nope, not that one. Get it started. All right, that's the one thing I forgot to load before meeting time. Had all the videos set up and so forth, but I didn't have that set up. Okay, now let's go back to share screen. We'll end the old presentation and get the new one started. Okay. All right. Record 4K video with a smartphone or tablet. And this is a very relevant presentation because I have known for quite some time, several years, that I had phones with enough resolution to shoot 4K video, and for that matter, single lens reflex digital cameras with enough resolution to shoot 4K video. Those cameras generally cannot be, those SLRs cannot be reprogrammed, but they do shoot 1080p video, what we call full high definition. Then I found out, before I bought my latest iPhone, I found out that I could download a free app to shoot 4K video with my Android phone. Now, why is this topic useful to you? First of all, 4K is already in widespread use. There are 4K TVs at very low prices, Blu-ray players for 4K Blu-ray discs. They're all very inexpensive already. It is very likely, in my opinion, that your grandchildren will grow up with it and learn to expect it. So, right now, you can make 4K videos of your grandchildren and yourself inexpensively today using your smartphone or tablet. One of the things I intensely regret that I did not do for my kids, I did not shoot video of my parents. I had the gear. It just never occurred to me that, you know, it was a limited time offer, that I should have taken care of that. Among other things, these various presentations I do for APCUG are going to end up on a hard drive that I give to each of my kids. So they're going to be able to see me for a long time to come. But in terms of 4K, 4K video can be shot on your phone, and then you can edit it using VideoPad or, for that matter, Vegas Movie Studio. And you can show your 4K videos on a 4K TV. Let's start by defining what full high definition is, which is the current US standard for digital television, and then what 4K video is as well. How does it differ? There are 4K high definition TVs available now. Even 4 years ago, was it 5? When I bought mine, it was only $300. And I might add that the first 1080p TV that I bought, a Sony, was $1,000. So prices have come down a lot. There are 4K video streaming services. There are 4K Blu-ray discs available. there are 4K video cameras, and that's where things get expensive. Those are still $1,000 plus. But there are 4K video recording apps. You can add one for your Android device. Samsung just announced the S22, the Galaxy S22 Ultra will have it built into the camera app. It's been built into the camera app of iOS devices since the iPhone 6S. And of course, we had demonstrated, we talked about VideoPad, which is a free 4K video editor that you can use to edit things and produce a nice compilation video if you want. Finally, we're going to talk about how to show 4K video on a 4K HD TV. Today's standard, what we call full high definition, has a resolution of about 2.1 megapixels per frame. And the actual frame size is 1920 pixels wide by 1080 tall. Also, the US standard for transmission is 30 frames per second. That is not quite so important as it used to be because it was tied into the frequency of AC current on the electrical grid. And that's what allowed TVs to sync with the signals from the TV stations. Now with digital signals and buffers and so forth, there's lots of frame rates possible. Many small inexpensive HDTVs either provide full HD or they, if they're really inexpensive, they're down to the 720 resolution, which is 1280 by 720. And one thing you may not know, almost all HDTVs sold in the US are computers and they run Linux. And because of buffering and other capabilities in these computers, they support other frame rates. 15 frames per second, you can display on an HDTV, and 25 and even 60. One of the things I like about my 1080p camcorder is it will shoot at 60. And for sports, that is just wonderful. It makes things look so much sharper. The digital transmission standard was adopted to replace the decades-old analog TV standard, which actually I think got started just before World War II. And of course, it was black and white for a long time. They added color in, I think, the early 60s. One of the things, let me go back a step. One of the things that full HD, the original digital television standard, was intended to achieve in the US was consistent color behavior, and in particular, a wider color gamut. What does gamut mean? It means the range of possible colors that can be displayed. One of the odd little things about color television in the old analog days was it couldn't display brown, which I thought was kind of weird. But they improved things quite a bit in the digital television standard so that there's a much wider gamut of colors. Now, 4K is a resolution, and it doubles both the horizontal size and the vertical size of each frame in a video, which means it requires a lot more data. And so the dimensions become 3,840 pixels wide and 2,160 pixels tall. And that's about 8.3 megapixels per frame. It's a lot more detail. Now, in particular, that's important. Greater resolution is useful because human eyes love detail. And so 4K shows a lot more detail than full HD. The first 4K digital movie I saw was in a movie theater here where I live, Arlington, Virginia, and that was the Star Trek Into Darkness movie in May 2013. Very interesting experience. It reminded me of something I'd learned years earlier. A screen can be too wide. What do I mean by that? Well, look, remember what I said, that the horizontal dimension of a 4K image, 4K frame, is 3,840 pixels. Spread that out across the screen that's 20 feet wide in a movie theater, and you can see every pixel because you're seeing 198 per foot on a 20-foot wide screen. It was a little bit disheartening. Now, for us mere mortals, consumers, 4K HDTVs became available in the US in 2012. That was several years after full HD, after the digital standard was introduced. And guess what? The initial price tag was $20,000 per set. They didn't sell very many at that price. But in the 10 years since then, the price has dropped a lot. As I said, 5 years ago, I bought mine. Mine cost $300 5 years ago. So the price had dropped a lot already by then. These are often advertised as ultra high definition. What they're referring to is that the screens have greater contrast, and that means there's a greater difference between each color. So the colors become more distinct. They are all sold with HDMI input sockets, and that's what you'd connect a Blu-ray player or a Roku player to. USB sockets, that's going to be important later on, and often Wi-Fi and Ethernet. I bought mine 42-inch LG HD TV at the end of 2017 for $300. LG was the low price leader at the time. I have not been dissatisfied with the set. It is very high quality. I'm very happy with it. That screen measures, horizontal measurement is just over 36 inches, 3 feet. So if you divide 3840 by 3, you're getting over 1,200 pixels per foot, which makes it much more right-sized for 4K images and 4K movies. It's about 100 pixels per inch, actually. And I got to say, I own a 4K Blu-ray player. Those prices are down. The low end is about $100 now. I also have a Roku that can display 4K images from, or 4K movies from Amazon Prime and from Netflix, and they look good. And I've even used it as a digital photo frame, and high resolution digital images look good on that set too. Now we're going to talk about this delightful topic, the chicken or the egg, because in this business of TV sets and corresponding media, there's always sort of a conundrum. There's been a long belief that any new media player won't sell, or any new media disc won't sell until the media is available to play. What I mean by that is the television set. If the television set isn't there, nobody's going to buy a 4K Blu-ray player or 4K Blu-ray disc, or rent them. You can even rent them from Redbox now. But as I mentioned, the 4K Blu-ray players, you can get them for as little as $100. When I bought my 4K set in 2017, those 4K players cost more than the set. Now, Redbox rents 4K Blu-ray titles, and some of them that they think have passed their peak, they'll even sell them. Amazon sells 4K Blu-ray titles. My local used media store sells used 4K Blu-ray titles. It's a real steal of a deal. That's CD Seller next to my county, Arlington, the city of Falls Church, Virginia. If you live in a major urban areas, you might look around for somebody who buys and some business that buys and sells used movies, because that's an opportunity to get 4K Blu-ray titles at a discount. Now we're going to talk about the chicken or the streaming egg. It turns out the Roku Premier 4K streaming box was released in 2016. And because of that, at the end of 2017, when I bought the LG 4K HD TV, I also bought the Roku Premier box. And at that time, there were already several 4K movies on Netflix. Roku has recently released a new model called Roku Ultra. And it, by the way, brought down the prices on the Roku Premier. So if you want something to use for viewing 4K movies and media via streaming, Premiere Box is a steal of a deal right now. Probably won't last very long because they'll sell out. Amazon Prime, they have 4K movies also and 4K TV shows. Netflix, I've already mentioned. Now, I got to admit, I have very high speed service at home. It's about, inbound is about 320 megabits per second. So my son can watch a 4K title on his Roku box, and I can watch a 4K title on mine at the same time. What I would recommend, if you only have if you have a speed below 100 megabits per second inbound, and you do have two users using the internet at the same time, even if only one of them's watching video, you probably want to look at upgrading your service a little bit. Full HD video cameras, yes, they exist. They've existed for a long time. Even some digital SLRs will shoot full HD. They have become the low-cost, high-quality devices for US consumer use with good zoom lenses. The zoom lens on my Canon 1080p camcorder, is much more powerful zoom than anything I have for, even in combination of the various zoom lenses for my SLRs. Some models of the major brands of these video cameras sell for as little as $200. It's a pretty good deal. Actually, the camera I'm using here in my Zoom studio at home is a 1080p camcorder, and I have an adapter that'll take the HDMI signal out of that and convert it to USB to feed it to Zoom. All of the FHD camcorders available these days record on flash memory cards, mostly SD. Some digital SLRs I mentioned also record full HD video. And in those camcorders and SLRs, the most widespread movie format is MP4. That's the file that they produce when you record a scene with those devices. Now, most smartphones and tablet camera apps will also record full HD video, but that's different from 4K. There are 4K camcorders as well, but this is critical to keep in mind. When buying a 4K camcorder, you get what you pay for. And if you don't pay much, you're not getting much. Amazon, in fact, is awash in 4K camcorders that cost less than $100. But first of all, they're from brands that even I have never heard of. And none of them have a zoom lens. You can get 4K recording capability on your smartphone or your tablet with not much of a zoom lens or none by downloading a free app. Don't buy one of these sub $100 4K camcorders. They're worthless. But the major camcorder brands offer 4K camcorders costing more than $1,000. Maybe you can get a used one for less than that. But that odd gap between $100 and $1,000, that price gap seems to persist. Now, if you're wondering, do I have a phone that's compatible with a 4K recording capability? There's a Wikipedia page for that. And it's a long list. In fact, it told me about my Galaxy S10 could shoot 4K video. And that thing I bought that like 7 years ago. Here's the QR code for that page in case you want to see it on your phone immediately. I'll let you scan that. The one thing that page doesn't do, which I really think it ought to do, is define what compatibility means. Now, if you think about it a little bit, it means two things. One, at least one of the cameras on the device has sufficient resolution to equal or exceed 4K resolution. And two, all the other resources on the device, the CPU, the RAM, and the other hardware things, are capable of handling the data at the rate 4K requires. So that list is pretty useful for that purpose, but I'm a little disappointed that they didn't define what compatibility means. I'm suggesting what it should mean. I hope they agree with me. Now here's some examples. In fact, I don't know, let me back up a step. I had originally set this up so you'd see one row at a time, but apparently I didn't do it right. My Galaxy S10, the phone I currently use, it has 4 cameras, 1 on front, 3 in the back, and it turns out every one of them has sufficient resolution so that it could shoot 4K. My Galaxy S7, which I added simply because they said it, they mentioned it in that Wikipedia page. It turns out it has 2 cameras. The rear camera can shoot 4K resolution. The front camera cannot. It is just basically slightly greater than, no, in fact, it doesn't even do full HD. Now that I think about it, I don't know why I didn't put the numbers in here, but the front camera can't do it. And this illustrates another aspect of compatibility. When you have a device with multiple cameras, it may be that only one of them will be compatible with 4K. Now here's the iPhone 10, which I bought used recently, and its front selfie does not have enough resolution for 4K, but the 2 cameras on the back do. So that gives you a sense of how the concept of compatible can vary a bit. What it comes down to is, in 2 of the 3 cameras I've noted here, the front selfie will not shoot 4K. So in most cases, it's unlikely that a front camera will shoot 4K unless it was designed fairly recently, within the last 4 or 5 years. All right, let's get past that. Mentioned this earlier, iPhone 6S and most recent iPhones have a point and shoot capability for 4K built into the camera app. In this case, point and shoot means you have very little ability through that app to adjust anything. Adjust the frame rate, adjust the exposure. Nah, it's not going to happen. Point and shoot. Now, it turns out it's not the default recording capability in the camera app. So here's how you change to 4K recording using the iOS 15 settings app. In that settings app, you scroll down the list of apps, find camera. Under camera, there's a subheading called record video. You tap that, and you can select the desired 4K resolution and frame rate. The video file type produced by iPhones is MOV, M-O-V. It is a QuickTime video format. Here is an example of the iPhone 10's camera app recording 4K video. You'll note it confirms that it's shooting 4K at 30 frames per second at the top center. And to actually start recording, guess what? You tap the big red button. It's not very hard to understand. You can switch between the 2 lenses by tapping 1x, and then it goes to 2x or back. Various apps, as you might guess, and this is so typical in this experience with cell phones for both iPhone and Android, various apps have been provided with several improvements over the camera app video recording capability. And so here's one that I like for iPhone. It's called Pro Movie. That's its icon, so you can recognize it visually. And this particular QR code, if you point your iPhone at it, it will allow you to open the Apple App Store app at the page for Pro Movie. So it's a very convenient way to get that thing onto your phone quickly if you want. So I'll leave it up here for a moment. why do I like it? It provides controls like a digital SLR for exposure. So you can separately adjust things such as the ISO sensitivity, such as the shutter speed, and although this is by far the least useful part of using a cell phone for shooting video, there's a very small range of adjustment in the aperture. That's why I, if I had my druthers, I'd be shooting a 4K camcorder, but hey, I'm retired and I don't have the money. This app also, like the camera app that is the built-in app on iPhones, this app also records 4K video in MOV files. And that turns out not to be such a bad thing, because I found that by testing over the past week, I found that MOV files from ProMovie and from the camera app, I can load right into both VideoPad and Vegas Movie Studio and edit them. It works just fine. Here's the ProMovie app screen, and you can see there's a lot more going on. It also has an ad, as you can see. The moment you hit the record button in the lower right corner, that ad disappears. What is a watermark? I think it shows up for like 2 seconds every 5 minutes. I'd have to check the app's documentation to be sure. You can spend the $2.99 and get rid of both the ad and the watermark if you're going to shoot long stuff. I ended up shooting 2 20-second videos, with each of the apps, the camera app and ProMovie, just to do some comparisons, and you'll learn what I found by doing so here in a bit. On the bottom of the screen here, you can see it reports the shutter speed, it reports the ISO. If you wanted to bump up the shutter speed, you could bump up the ISO, and that gives you a much greater chance of steadier images. It reports the white balance. That number followed by the letter K refers to the Kelvin temperature of the light. And that's typical. I shot this at night, and that's fairly typical for the illumination in my kitchen, that it would be down around 3,000. Outside runs between 5,000 in daylight, 5,000 and 5,600 K. And over here on the right in the margin, you can adjust the exposure up and down a little bit directly. And there's some other nice features on here. One of the things it'll tell you is how much room you have left on your phone for recording video. And I had 38.9 gigabytes. And it also on the left confirms that you're shooting 4K 30 frames per second. I believe in settings, it allows you to set other frame rates and possibly lower resolutions. I really wanted to make sure it shot 4K, so that's all I tested. And as I mentioned, the ad disappears when you tap the record button. Now, Android. Until Samsung announced the new Samsung Galaxy S22 Ultra, you have to go to the Google Play Store and find a 4K video recording app. There's a lot of them. I've been using an app that I downloaded about 8 months ago. It's called 4K Camera Pro, and it works really well. It's a lot like ProMovie. It has all those controls, but that app's no longer in the Google Play Store, and I don't know why. I actually wrote them yesterday. I sent an email and asked the publisher, did you rename it, or what happened? I haven't gotten a response yet. So I looked around for another app. I was going to try to find something that had no ads or minimal ads, high ratings, stores video on the SD card, because that's really the best way to go in the Android world. Some exposure and focus control, and preferably using all of the compatible cameras on the back of the phone. Turns out 4K Camera Pro does use the compatible cameras. It uses both of the ones on the back, and it uses the selfie camera on the front of my Galaxy S10 phone. And here's the 4K Camera Pro screen, lots of controls, just like we saw earlier. And I shot a lot. I shot something like 2 hours of video. I mean, not all at once, but I shot something like 2 hours of video with this app. And it really works very well. I did find another app, and I'm going to show it to you. It's called HD Camera for Android. There's its icon so you can recognize it visually. Oddly enough, when you install it on your phone, it's just called Camera. And if you list your entire list of apps in alphabetic order as I do, you have to look in C for camera to find it. There's its QR code. That QR code, if you have an Android phone and you scan that QR code, it will open the Google Play Store app to the page for HD Camera for Android. So you can download it quickly if you want. So we'll take another moment here to let you do that. I mentioned its icon is named Camera. It looks the same, it just doesn't use that long name. It does not record 4K video by default, but you go to the settings and it allows you to set that. It only uses one of the two compatible cameras on the back of my phone. I'm not sure why that happens, why some developers are able to use both and some are only able to use one. It may be that they didn't know enough about the phone to figure out how to switch the cameras. They can't possibly buy every smartphone and try them all. It does record in MP4 files when it's shooting 4K video. Here's the screen. It does have some exposure control. You can see that up, down. You see the light bulb with plus and minus, the vertical line on the right. Other than that, it really doesn't have much in the way of controls. You can turn on and off the LED on the back of the phone if you want, with that flash symbol in the lower right corner, lower left, I'm sorry. It does confirm on the middle left that you're shooting 4K, so you know you've got it configured correctly once that thing shows up. In all of these, when you hit the round red button to start recording, it changes to a square button, and then that's what you tap to stop recording. There's even one app called Pause Cam that'll let you start and then pause recording and then resume recording into the same file. That feature I've not seen very often. All right. I'm not sure I really need to spend much time talking about this subject. The phrase MP4 refers to the Moving Pictures Expert Group, where the acronym MPEG comes from, and it's version 4 of their definition of the lossy file format. Lossy means that the recording system, in this case a smartphone, decides that certain features do not need to be as sharp as the camera sees them. And the justification behind this is the expert group decided that that nobody would miss those tiny little details. Well, okay, some of us would beg to differ, but the fact that this is compressed video with some loss means that it can fit on our phone and we can shoot more than a couple of minutes. So it's really a trade-off that I think most of us are willing to tolerate. But I should add also that QuickTime move files are also lossy compression. Not all of them. QuickTime was originally designed as a lossless format, but for purposes of these small devices, these smartphones and tablets with limited resources, they have adopted some compression schemes to save space during recording. And I tested them with both Vegas Movie Studio and VideoPad version 10.36. And it turns out that the 20-second files that I shot with both of the iPhone apps and with the move files, and the two 20-second files I shot with each of my Android apps, they all worked fine in the editors. All the editors loaded the videos, all the editors previewed the videos, all the editors allowed video cut and paste. I tested these on my Windows 10 computer with 8 gigabytes of RAM, We're going to come back to that in a minute. All 4 applications produced files that were completely compatible with the editors. Now, a video file size comparison. What I did was take the 40 seconds or so of video I shot with each app, figured out the total file size of those 2 files, and then divided it by the number of seconds. So what you see here is a direct comparison of the file size recorded per second by each of these 4 apps. The top 2 are the Android apps, and the bottom 2 are the iPhone apps. And notice that the rate of data per second is dramatically different. And in particular, 4K Camera Pro, the obsolete app that I still use occasionally, recorded at a very, very high data rate per second. And Pro Movie for iOS records at a very low data rate per second. Now, none of these 4 apps allow you to change the compression extent, because MPEG, like JPEG, can be varied in the amount of compression applied. But these apps do not permit you to do that. They don't permit you to change it. If you make it a higher rate, it becomes a bigger file, but you see more data in the video, or you see more detail rather in the video. If it's a lower rate like Pro Movie, then obviously you can shoot a lot more video with a finite amount of storage on your phone. But on the other hand, a lot more of the detail is discarded. So you pick the one that you're comfortable with. Personally, after I did this, I probably won't use 4K Camera Pro again, because that's just too high a data rate. Look, I can cut it in half by using HD camera for Android. And I think that's a big deal. In another way, it's a big deal as well. And this is what I was referring to earlier. I mentioned that my Windows 10 computer has 8 gigabytes of RAM. This is the computer that I currently use to do video editing. I shot a 16-minute test video with 4K Camera Pro. And you can guess, it became an awfully big file. And it turned out that a 16-minute video at that data rate, the file size of 11.9 megabytes per second, meant that VideoPad could load the file and allow me to edit it. But oddly enough, Vegas Movie Studio would open the file but would not load it. It failed. And I'm pretty sure it's related to the amount of RAM in my computer, because that file was actually it was actually about 5 gigabytes, if I recall correctly. So if you shoot very long scenes with your phone, just keep this in mind, that it may cause some difficulty in editing. And so it's better to shoot many short scenes than a single long scene. As I mentioned, none of these apps allow you to control or change the degree of loss, the degree of lossy compression. It'd be nice to have that. I've never found an app that permits that, and I suspect it's part of limitations in the phone's operating systems, but I'm not sure of that. I mentioned this just a moment ago. I shot 2 20-second videos with each app for purposes of this test this week. They all loaded fine, but the 16-minute video could not load. VideoPad was able to load it. They may actually do something that doesn't load the actual file so much as loading an index into the images in the file. I'm not sure of that. I haven't tried to talk to them about it. That's one of the reasons I want to try to buy Vegas Movie Studio 19. I want to see if it does a better job. Also, when you're editing video on a computer, the personal computer RAM is always the bottleneck for loading large video files. So if you're really serious about this, make sure you buy the maximum amount of RAM for your personal computer. And this computer I have Doesn't have any slots available for me to add stuff in it, and I'm probably going to replace it fairly soon. Otherwise, I could actually bump it up to, I think, 16 gigs, and that would probably make it a lot easier to edit the multi-minute 4K videos. All right, enough of that. Let's talk about you've finished editing your 4K video and you want to play it. You want to show it off. I'm going to show you how to do it on my LG 4K HD TV. Of course, I can't buy every HD TV out there, so I can't tell you how to do it on every other brand. But I'll tell you what I do know. You place your 4K video file that comes out of your video editor, the one you've rendered. You place that on a USB flash drive. You plug the flash drive into your 4K HDTV USB port. Turn on that 4K HDTV. Now, in mine, on the remote, I tapped the input button, and that's what allows me to choose between the live TV coming in on the antenna and the HDMI ports on the TV and the USB flash drive, which I've highlighted here in red. So I selected that one. And once I do that, then the HDTV shows a menu. Now, this is a little bit silly, this menu, because it has two choices, photos and video or music. And there was no music on the USB drive. You'd think it would know there's no music on the USB drive. Well, that's not how it's programmed. Maybe if I bought one today, it would figure that out. But in any event, I had to select, using the remote, I selected photos and video. Now, at that point, it scans the USB device, and it will list on the screen the files found on the flash drive. So I selected one of those to be played, and it turns out once you select one, it plays all the others as well, but it starts with the one you choose. And it turns out that this HDTV, which I bought 5 years ago, it will play MOV files as well as MP4s. And prior to last night, I didn't know that because I'd never tested a MOV file on it. So that's good news for you Apple folks. Now, that comes to the end of this presentation. I want to mention that you can, if you wish, use Zoom to attend a future meeting of my group, the Potomac Area Technology and Computer Society. There's its URL. Now, in order to do that, you write to this email address and ask for the Zoom meeting ID and passcode. You have to include your first and last name, your city and state, and your user group name, please. But I've created a convenience for you. If you scan this QR code, it will open your email app with the email already filled in, including the address, the subject line, and the text, but it has spaces for you to fill in your first and last name, your city and state, and your user group name. So that's a convenience, and perhaps you'll take advantage of it. Leave that up for a moment. Okay, so I'm going to stop the share, and we can take questions.
Okay, my question sheet is printing as we speak. MAGIX. If you back up the files and project using the same path structure on an external drive, can you edit the project from the backup drive, or does the fact that it is a different drive letter break the project?
I don't know. I haven't tried that. It's an interesting experiment. I don't honestly know. But since the question pertained to the prior presentation, there's one thing that I'm afraid I didn't explain in that prior presentation, and I want to make it really clear. Okay. For rendering purposes, plan to keep all of your media on one drive. Everything in the project can be in different folders. That's not a problem. Keep it all in one drive. Let me explain why. If you try to render to that same drive it's going to take forever. The idea is to render to a separate drive. That can be an SSD, it can be a flash drive, but render to something other than the drive on which the media is located, because the computer systems end up in a lot of what they call contention for reading and writing on the same hard drive if you do it all on one. So make sure you do it on two. Now, I know that didn't address the question, but it's something I felt I really ought to make clear to everybody. That's my little tip for rendering in a pretty fast operation.
Can you edit the 4K 60 FPS videos from your iPhone on a Windows PC?
Oh, yes, absolutely. In fact, I think I mentioned that I was able to, I use a Windows 10 computer, the same one that I'm using for Zoom today. And I used both VideoPad and Vegas Movie Studio on Windows 10. And both of them were able to load the move files and edit the move files from my iPhone. So the answer is yes. Now, how you get them there, it's another matter. It turns out that both of those apps that I mentioned for iPhone, the camera app and Pro Movie, they both record their MOV files in the same directory that has all your photos in it. So you have a couple of options for moving them to your Windows computer. One of them is you simply connect the iPhone to the computer with a USB cable, and then you can directly copy things out of that photos directory, including the move files. There's other ways to do it. You can use iCloud, and I think generally the video files are going to be too big to send by email, but there are other cloud storage capabilities. I use one called Terabyte, and or what's it called? Hang on a second. Let's see here.
While you're looking, if you
Terabox.
have,
It's Terabox. Sorry, I wanted to make sure I got that right. The Terabox provides for free a terabyte of storage, and it has apps for both iPhone and Android. So I for one of the two apps, I had moved the files onto Terabox from the iPhone, and then from Terabox on my computer onto my computer local drives. But however you do it, what I'm telling you is there's plenty of ways to do it. Moving those big files around is not difficult.
if you have a Gmail account, it will put a link in your drive that the person you're sending it to can click on it and download it.
Right.
I did that for my Thursday one of my Thursday presentations. Easy peasy.
They have that Google experience is a little odd, because when you attempt to download such a large file, at first it puts up a warning that Google hasn't been able to scan the file for viruses. And yeah, I got to admit, that's a little unnerving, but since I produced the file, I didn't think there was going to be a virus in it, and I downloaded it anyway. Oh, and I want to mention, Gary and I know a couple other folks that I've been acquainted with have been on this meeting. I just wanted to say hi. Gary Oddie is going to be doing a presentation next week at our meeting. And I know Gabe was on here, Gabe Goldberg. I don't know if he still is, but we still have 72 participants. And I got to admit, 2 hours after we started, I didn't expect to have that many. So I guess you guys must be interested. Thank you. Judy, what else?
Does Vegas Movie require a monthly, yearly subscription? I know the answer to that one.
It turns out they will sell you the current version.
Yep.
But they will also allow you to buy a subscription for, I believe it's $6.95 a month. I'm not absolutely sure that. I'm not inclined to buy this. The advantage of the subscription is very simple. Another version comes out, you get it. Now, if I were editing video day in and day out for years at a time, which I am not, I would consider doing that. I do that for Adobe Photoshop, and it's $10 a month. I get Photoshop and Lightroom and a couple other things that way. But I do a lot more photography than I do video, so I'm willing to pay the subscription. There is a pro version of Vegas that has a ton of additional features. They offer that for $16 a month. I bought Vegas Pro version 4 and produced a lot of those DVDs that I showed at the beginning of my first presentation with Vegas Pro version 4. I happen to think that everything that I wanted in Vegas Pro back in those days, in the early 2000s, is now in Vegas Movie Studio, and I cannot justify spending the money on Vegas Pro anymore. I think Movie Studio does everything that most people need.
And if you have recurring subscription type things that comes automatically out of a credit card or your bank account, don't forget to include that information in your information for your executor so they know to shut it down.
Yes, very
Plug for
important.
my presentation. For making the videos from still photographs, is there a limit on the file size? I take RAW and JPEG photos. RAW files are about 25 megs. A JPEG's about 5 megs.
To be honest, at 1080p and even 4K resolution, 4K resolution, as I mentioned, is about 8.3 megapixels. If you're stuffing a 20 megapixel RAW into an 8 megapixel 4K project, you're going to lose a lot of detail anyway. I stick with the JPEGs. I use JPEGs and PNGs. I didn't specifically say this, but for those slides, what I do for the pre-meeting slideshow is I design all the slides in LibreOffice Impress. You can do the same thing in PowerPoint, and then export them as very high resolution images. And you have to do the nice thing about PowerPoint. Now, Judy knows this. I don't say nice things about any Microsoft product very often, but the nice thing about PowerPoint is it will allow you to export all the files to PNG or whatever other format you choose in one command. In LibreOffice Impress, you still have to do it separately for each slide. So you do 16 commands, or 15 in my case, instead of 1. But I strongly suggest for anybody who's doing 1080p video with photographs, or 4K for that matter, given the resolution of most SLRs is above 10 megapixels and some quite a bit above 10 megapixels like mine, there's no difference between using a JPEG and using the RAW. I have not tried to import any RAW for that matter into the, I would try TIFF, that's one of the things I can do is I can capture all the data from a RAW in a TIFF file, and I could try importing that. My guess is that it's unlikely that the editors would support TIFF, and I think it's almost impossible to support RAW because there's at least 2 different RAW formats for Canon, and I don't know how many for Nikon and Sony. So I think it's very unlikely that although having said all that, given the fact that Vegas Movie Studio originated from Sony, or at least Sony was the owner for a while, maybe they'd support RAW from Sony. I'll take this a step further. I think RAW would be supported if you're using Vegas Pro, but I don't think Movie Studio is going to do that. And in any event, like I said, I don't think there's a darn bit of difference at either 4K or 1080p between using a JPEG and using a RAW.
I have a question, but my question is for Fran. Fran, do you have a very famous relative who is one of the best hockey players in the world? And if you don't want to unmute yourself, John, can you unmute everybody? Because it's time for open mic. Put the answer in the chat box for me, okay? Over to Steve. Oh, I have something else. We had one person that had to leave to get it back into the real world. And he said, what are you going to do when it's football seasons and you have Saturday workshops? Come on. I asked John Kennedy why they meet on Sunday and not Saturday. And he said, because we don't want to miss any of the football games. And we would make sure that didn't happen. So over to you, Steve Parker.
Is the sound working now? Can you hear me?
Yep, perfectly.
Okay. What Kurt was saying is exactly what I've got on the background now. The only problem is that I've got the Milky Way in there. So when it goes over from one, it's a fade of about a few seconds or so. You can actually see where it sort of jumps. Well, it doesn't jump, it sort of fades back from one to the other. So it still doesn't quite work with things like stars, but the other one that I had, well, made quite a few, was that one works fairly well doing it that way. That was exactly the same method that Kurt suggested. And one other thing I did was this one, I changed the frame sequence and ran it backwards so that it looks like I'm riding on the roller coaster. This one normally was going the other way. And then you just have to find two frames, the beginning end, so that it doesn't jump from one to the other. And I did all those and that one too with Mauve Abbey. I used that Vegas one when Sony produced it, and I hated that thing. It was a piece of crap. This Mauve Abbey one I found works far better than that.
That's funny. I started out when my kids started doing stage plays in school. I started out using Pinnacle Studio because it showed up on the disc when I bought one of my external CD-ROM burners. It showed up as part of the utilities on the disc. And I started out at like version 5, and they kept issuing versions.
Have you ever used Premiere Pro? The Adobe?
Let me finish. The Pinnacle Studio took a different approach where every video also could be edited in the same application to produce a DVD by introducing chapter marks in the video. Mm-hmm. And every year when they issued a new version, it introduced more bugs. And by version 10, it got to the point where I could save a video with chapter marks in it. And when I loaded the video again the next day, half the chapter marks were gone and the others were in places I hadn't put them. And that's why I went to Sony Vegas. And I was very happy with Sony Vegas, and I'm now still very happy with it. But I'm no longer producing DVDs because nobody wants them anymore. No, I haven't tried Premiere or Premiere Pro. I did get an offer once for Premiere Elements, and I loaded it, and I found out it wouldn't do the splash video at the start of the DVD before the movies, and that was the end of using Premiere Elements. But today, my purpose today was to let people who haven't done video editing get their feet wet. You're obviously a guy with a lot of experience, Steve, and I take no issue with that experience. I think it's very smart to choose the thing that you're most comfortable with and does the best job for you. But one other comment, one of the guys in my computer group does use version 20 of Pinnacle Studio, and he says the bugs are gone. They've learned how to do software right. So that's another possibility for people because that's low end, but it will not do, as far as I can tell, it will not do the keyframes editing the way that Vegas does. And I think the keyframes editing really sets Vegas apart from other low-cost software. And
Pinnacle used to be a supporter of user groups, but then they went away. We used to be able to get product for them. They gave product for door prize raffles and all that good kind of stuff.
Yeah,
Someone wants to know if you have ever used DaVinci, which is a free program.
I have not. I have downloaded a couple of freebies. Judy, you might be familiar with. There was a website called 2 Cows. The ultimate collection of Windows software. And if I needed some specific utility or something, I'd go on there. I actually found a product called, what was it called? Light Ray. That was a video editor, and it had the problem with some of these shareware products is they have very little documentation and support. And I mean, it couldn't do 5% of what I do with Vegas. Now, I may be dissing it without being properly informed, because frankly, if I could have found the documentation, I may have spent a lot more time trying to use it. But it was, I thought, very frustrating. All right, other questions?
We want questions, please. No questions?
We'll go to Kurt. He raised his hand, so
Cool.
go ahead, Kurt. You need
Sorry about that. I had to step away. There are several video recording programs for Android in the Play Store. Which one are you using?
I mentioned HD camera for Android.
Yep, there's at least 4 of them.
Well, that's what, let me, hang on a second. Let me get back to that slide and then I'll share it. The point is, one of the reasons that I showed the icons
Yes, thank you.
is that the icons allow you to recognize the right one, the one that I have been using, which I think is, it doesn't have quite the number of controls that I want, but it's not bad. All right, so now I'm going to share that. And remember also that I included on that slide the QR code. And why do I mention that? Because that QR code will take you right to that page.
And I did it, and it worked fine, John.
Okay.
I'm sorry,
Very
I
good.
had to step away, so thank you very much.
All right.
And of course, I can highly recommend Microsoft's Live Essential Video Maker from 2012.
I think there might be some question whether a 2012 version would support 4K, but
No, it won't, but that's just for editing your videos.
yeah.
Any other questions? If not, Mr. Kennedy.
Wow, what a great way to start off our Saturday safaris. Took us through the jungle and right out into the open pasture area. Want to thank everybody for coming. We'll be back in 3 months with another Saturday safari. I don't have it in my head, the sequence of which Saturday of the month, but it'll be not the second, it'll be the first or the third. And so watch for that. If you have a topic or you have a presentation that you would like to take us on a safari, please contact Judy and say, hey, I'd like to do that. That was fun today. And there's just no big pressure on that. We'll also be back the next 2 Wednesdays with our Wednesday workshop. And we've got plans for next month's Wednesday workshop, which also, if you are interested in being part of a team, so you don't have to do the whole time like John did this month or I did for a Wednesday workshop, we can put together a team and you can just do part of the 2-hour session. So I'd like to thank Bill James for being our co-host as always, Judy Talluer for being our question gal, and of course, not least, the other John Kay for a tremendous workshop. And we'll see everybody at the next gathering.
Which will be next Wednesday. And it is John Kennedy about
Learning Linux. And we'll be talking about a journey of distro hopping and software and control panels.
And the following Wednesday, Bill James will do a deep dive on Windows 11.